Personally, since I grew up in the environment and culture of Chinese Buddhism, I noticed some very obvious differences between Chinese Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism. For example, Tibetan Buddhism has a lot more practices and tasks, such as preliminary practices, empowerments, retreats, more focused on the study of wisdom because of its large number of assignments. Whereas for Chinese Buddhism, the education we received when we first became monks was that you can't attend Buddhist academies to study. You have to spend quite a few years actually living in the monastery, meditating, and achieve key practice results, like developing renunciation. And then if you are willing to serve others, you would have developed compassion. Then the senior monk will observe you, and only after your practices are secure will he then allow you to go to study. Otherwise, they tend to say, when a snake drinks water, it turns it into poison. If you study scriptures without knowing whether you have the right intention, you might instead criticize Buddhism after reading them, just like we've seen many scholars in Taiwan who use their own certified ideas to judge what is right and wrong in Buddhism. Some even have their own strong prejudice and assertions about Tibetan Buddhism. I also felt this issue after visiting many Han Chinese monasteries, who tend to have this bias. Some senior monks say they're afraid to send students to Buddhist academies because when they come back, they'll stop reciting the name of the Buddha. They are concerned that their mindsets would change after studying. But of course, I believe that the so-called everyday Buddhism cannot live without the application of Buddhist theories. They should be applied to daily lives. So we proposed a system called work study. As my master had said, don't spend more than 2 hours learning, reflecting, and practicing, but you must apply what you've learned in your daily life. He would observe how you walk, how you wash dishes, how you interact, how you answer phones, to see whether the renunciation and compassion that you've learned are reflected in your daily life. He's quite strict with that. It's like Zen Buddhism integrated into everyday life. Of course, some of us really love to study and they just keep diving deeper and deeper into it. Some people, on the other hand, are very diligent and attentive in their daily practices, while some other people aren't really doing well in both. But in my opinion, my personal view is that the scriptures of Chinese Buddhism are very vast. Even if you went into retreat for 5 or 10 years, you couldn't finish them because you have to contemplate every word. For example, when explaining the Heart Sutra, thanks to the lineage master's compassion of Tibetan Buddhism, the essence of these sutras has been compiled into a very well-structured sequence, like Lamrim Chenmo and Words of My Perfect Teacher. They provide a very good framework. But here, as you might notice, it will become Chinese Buddhism tends to focus a bit more on daily life, while Tibetan Buddhism emphasizes more on listening, contemplating, and practicing. But nowadays, many people studying Tibetan Buddhism struggle to complete their paths because there are too many tasks to finish. If they dedicate their lives to it, they'd eventually end up getting divorced. Why? Because the wife is busy practicing every day, and the husband complains about how she's detached from life. I'm reflecting on this myself. It's good to study and practice Dharma, but how do we actually find a balance? Of course, personally, all I can tell him is we all know the theory. Renunciation, great compassion, bodhicitta, contemplating emptiness. You apply them to life so that everything becomes a form of practice. For example, when you're driving in the car, you practice things as illusions. You see them clearly, but not without compassion. For every car, every person by the roadside, every shop, you should wish they fulfill all their wishes so they gain happiness now and then give rise to bodhicitta in the future. The key is to have mindfulness. Just like when we recite Amitabha Buddha, I'd tell them, it doesn't matter how many repetitions you make. What matters is whether you have the mindset of Amitabha to care for the people, things, and events around you. It's like reciting Om Mani Padme Hum, because some people really don't have the time to study, contemplate, and practice the teachings at all. They would feel ashamed that they can't practice. But if there is a way for them to quickly grasp the essentials and enter the stages of Dharma without having to worry about other things, then they can feel at ease, knowing that their practice is steady, that they have a lot of compassion, and that they have gained some awareness about life and death. Maybe because the Chinese are more simple-minded, they think that as long as they can be reborn in Pure Land, they'll be satisfied. They recite the Buddha's name, let go of worldly attachments, do their best to fulfill their responsibilities to the world, but when death comes, it'd be like graduation for them. They don't have other worries. This way of thinking is a bit simplistic, but it is how practices in Chinese Buddhism have become, while Tibetan Buddhism has another style. Both traditions have their own unique approaches to practice. However, since a substantial number of Khenpo's disciples are Han Chinese by ethnicity, perhaps Khenpo also have a very effective way of guiding them as a different culture. So this time we also intentionally came to learn about it, since we're Han Chinese as well. Unlike practicing Tibetan Buddhism, we Chinese would tend to observe and judge people based on their behaviors. No matter how many years this person has studied, we look at their composure based on how they sit, walk, and drink tea. This would tell us what stage of practice they're at. If they can't even hold a book properly, can't even use a teacup, if they don't tidy up the table after eating, the old monk would say, "This won't do. This person is just a scholar, not a practitioner." He would be very adamant about this. So for us Chinese, this is what the old monk criticizes. He doesn't care how much you've read. But in Tibetan Buddhism, at least in my impression, it's more about, have you finished your studies? What stage are you at in the sequence? They really tend to emphasize this aspect more. But I think nowadays, we probably have to combine both approaches. Now, there's another issue, as Khenpo Rinpoche had just mentioned, the problem with mobile phones. Because once we brought 40 young novice monks with us, they were not allowed phones. But after they started using phones, 2/3 of them returned to lay life. Now, the Thai government is facing the same problem. They originally had 400,000 ordained monks and set a ban on phones, but then the young monks protested. They couldn't accept not being allowed to use them, yet after they allowed it, the number of ordained monks dropped by a quarter. Now they're trying to figure out what to do about this. So, Khenpo, what are your thoughts on young people using phones, especially Buddhists using phones? How exactly should they deal with this in this situation?
Well, first of all, as Venerable Hightower pointed out earlier, there are some notable similarities and differences between the traditions of Tibetan Buddhism and the traditions of Chinese Buddhism. These differences may be a result of different histories and different long-standing ethnic perspectives, and there may also be some differences depending on the area as well. Personally, for myself, since 1987 up until this June, I have been providing guidance, translation, and giving some lectures to the Han Chinese community who study at Laronga. It's been 30 years now, so I'm quite familiar with Tibetan methods of practice, as well as the methods of practice in the Han regions. However, when it comes to some Western ways of thinking in particular, we are not very familiar. They have a different approach, especially in comparison to others. As for Tibetan and Chinese Buddhism nowadays, I would say that the relationship between the two traditions is in fact very good overall. For one thing, there are many open-minded eminent monks and great masters in the Han regions who are very accepting of Tibetan Buddhism and Theravada Buddhism, as well as the various schools within Chinese Buddhism itself, such as the Chan, Huayan, and Pure Land Buddhist traditions. They study all of these in a very inclusive way, with mutual respect, learning and understanding each other. Based on my own personal memories and impression, compared to around 20 years or 30-something years ago, we now have a very good and balanced room and additional opportunities for communication between different kinds of Buddhist schools. Before this, in Tibetan Buddhism, many of the older, more conservative monks in particular might have been rather exclusive in their own schools, practices, and beliefs, often rejecting other Buddhist branches. It wasn't just with Chinese Buddhism, even within Tibetan Buddhism itself, among the Gelug Sakya and Nyingma schools, communication within these groups was not always that easy either. But now, between us and the modern day, many of the distances and barriers have already disappeared, which I feel particularly fortunate of and thankful for. I'm not just saying polite words today, there's really no need for that, but it's thanks to Dharma masters like Master Hai Tao and many other far-sighted Dharma teachers who have put in years of effort so that everyone can understand and learn from each other across different Buddhist schools. Understanding each other is actually very important. The teachings of Buddha Shakyamuni themselves are the same in nature, but they're passed down over time in different regions and among different ethnicities. The differences are only different integrations of the Dharma into people's customs and lifestyles, or you could say into their traditions. That's how Buddhism has taken shape over time. So I think that nowadays for us, among all the different Buddhist traditions with different lineages in the world, there are many ways of harmonization. This is truly something that makes me very happy. In Tibet, there are also theoretical and practical schools. The theoretical school studies on a daily basis with debates and contemplations. However, as for their basic practices like reciting mantras or basic behaviors and conducts, even simple tasks like sweeping the floor or doing the laundry, for example, they're not very good at these. In Han Chinese regions, we often call such people bookworms. They're very good at studying, but when it comes to being a person, interacting and communicating with others, they're quite incompetent. Actually, in our Tibetan Buddhism as well, this kind of person is not particularly well received. Even though they may study well and explain theory very well, but interacting with others becomes quite troublesome for them. They are not really practicing diligently. It's quite similar to many people in academia nowadays. In academia, everything is based entirely on their intellect, using their discriminating mind to draw conclusions. Actually, we don't really praise this approach. One must have a solid theoretical foundation. Otherwise, it's very easy to develop wrong views and very easy to sometimes fall into skepticism and lose your mind of faith. But at the same time, we do need to be like Chinese Buddhism with morning and evening recitations and regular practices, including chanting the Buddha's name in meditation. These are very important. So as I see it, both theory and practice, in essence, or rather being a good person and studying Buddhism, in essence, cannot be separated. Some people study Buddhism very well, but have poor relationships with their families and are always in conflict with their relatives, friends, and family members. People who study Buddhism do not necessarily have to become monastics. We are not particularly pleased when someone insists on ordaining right away. Let them take time to observe. Otherwise, if you have children, or perhaps a husband or a wife currently living at home with you, their lives won't be properly settled after you become a monk, then it'd be very pitiful for them. However, if the conditions really ripens, there is no use in trying to prevent it. But before that, one should not give up everything on a sudden impulse. A person's family is precious, and if it is damaged in some way or compromised, it may not be good for oneself or for others. So this matter does indeed need to be very carefully considered. Therefore, I think we must integrate the two of being a human and being a Buddhist. Theory and practice must also be joined together, and our faith in Buddhism should learn to blend in with daily life and with society. Otherwise, studying Buddhism, you may feel out of place. After studying Buddhism, you might cause a significant impact on your family, or even have a large negative impact on society as a whole. That may not necessarily be the mark of a truly good practitioner in every case. This is the first point to make. The second point is that, indeed, many of our monastics nowadays are greatly affected by their reliance on mobile phones and such devices. Even our Buddhist Academies board has held many meetings on this issue, discussing if we could collect mobile phones. But in this era of the internet, it's so pervasive, there's nothing we can do. If we confiscate one phone, they might simply buy another one and hide it somewhere safe. So for many things, there really may in fact be no solution at all. As monastics, we often talk about this as well. Now, these days, it's getting increasingly difficult to study the precepts. There are also many external influences. It's not just us monastics, even lay people. Many lay practitioners today used to recite mantras and read books. But now, everyone is practicing Buddhism while looking at their phones. Most information on mobile phones isn't reliable or true. So we are especially wholeheartedly grateful to Life TV for providing everyone with such a platform that constantly brings so much positive energy in so many years. Since everyone likes to watch it at this time, if we present ourselves online in this way to help them, it would indeed be a very wise choice.